Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
وفي الملف الأمني انفجر سيارة مفخخة بالقرب من ساحة الطيران وسط
A car bomb exploded near an airfield in the center of Baghdad, injuring 9 people. The explosion also destroyed a number of vehicles and public properties. 1 person was killed and 5 others were injured in a car explosion near the General Hospital in the town of Baqouba. In another development, the Iraqi army announced the death of 7 multinational soldiers in clashes in the western part of Iraq.
بعدما كشر الإرهاب عن أنيابه إثر سقوط جميع الأقنعة التي
The terrorists reveal their true criminal nature by adopting the strategy of randomly killing and targeting the innocent Iraqi civilians. By doing this, they showed their hatred toward the Iraqi people who suffered for decades under the dictatorship of the former regime, and now they are suffering from terror activities. During the early morning rush hour, a terrorist detonated a booby-trapped car targeting an Iraqi army vehicle in Hay al-Amala, in the northern part of Baqouba, northeast of the Iraqi capital. A child was killed, and 8 others were injured. And in Baqouba, a terrorist opened fire on the car of Dr. Abdel Mohsen Ali, who is the director of the hospital, killing him and critically injuring his chauffeur. In Baghdad, the police chief of Abu Ghraib precinct, Mudhir Muhammad Yusuf, was assassinated by terrorists in the area of Al-Ubadi in the eastern part of the Iraqi capital. A car bomb explosion also took place in Al-Ubudiyya Civic Center in a crowded tunnel in Al-Bawaba Sharqiyya, killing at least 5 civilians and injuring 29 others. The random killing continues to be the language of the terrorists who are trying to hamper and sabotage democracy in Iraq. The new strategy used by the terrorists of targeting innocent civilians is exposing their ugly faces and showing their hidden hatred for the Iraqi people. Layth Al-Saadi, Al-Iraqiya Television, Baghdad.
The American President George Bush said that the strong partnership between his country and Saudi Arabia will continue after the death of King Fahd. In a written statement, Bush gave his condolences to the Saudi royal family, saying that he hopes Saudi Arabia achieves prosperity and security under the leadership of the new king. American officials believe that the death of King Fahd will have no effect on the Saudi-American relations, which have been strong for a long time. The American President George Bush had met with King Abdullah several times when he was the crown prince.
Just like his predecessors, the late King Fahd bin Abdulaziz maintained strong ties with the U.S. The American-Saudi relations constituted one of the strongest alliances that superpower had in the Arab region. This continued to be the case until the September 11th attacks, which were carried out by some Saudis, disturbing the American-Saudi relations. The Bush administration describes its relations with Saudi Arabia as a strategic alliance built on the American desire to secure its access to Saudi oil and on Riyadh's need for American protection to its oil fields. This explains the American interest of King Fahd's death reflected by the official statements and press coverage.
The king was a friend of the United States.
The king was a friend to the U.S. and played a major role in shaping events in the region and the world. He was a partner in the Middle East peace process, and we will always remember him. We extend our condolences to his family and the people of Saudi Arabia at this time.
Although the American public and media expressed resentment against Saudi Arabia following the September 11 attacks, the American administration and the Saudi government maintained their strong relations. This was evident in 1994 when the king allowed hundreds of thousands of American soldiers to stay in the kingdom after freeing Kuwait from the Iraqi forces. This angered Saudi Salafi groups, which in the mid-90s launched 2 attacks targeting American interests in the Saudi kingdom. However, the relations between the two countries grew stronger since then, especially in the so-called war on terrorism. Some Americans have suspicious feelings towards the Saudi ally and requested its punishment, but the Bush administration continued to have faith in the royal family.
The American empire is relying to a great extent on an oil-based economy. So despite American anger towards Islamic fundamentalism, the American administration has no choice but to deal with the Saudi kingdom. At times, the U.S. used diplomacy in its relations with the kingdom, and at other times, political pressure.
However, critics of the Saudi-American relations contend that such relations exceed the normal strategic alliance by serving private interests between the Saudi royal family and the Bushes. Usually, the death of leaders affects their country's foreign relation, but the death of the Saudi king will not affect the Saudi-American relations because they are based on mutual interests. These interests have not been shaken by big incidents and most likely will continue to be strong even after the departure of the Saudi King Fahd bin Abdulaziz.
The late King Fahd was laid to rest this afternoon in the Saudi capital Riyadh after prayers at the mosque. A modest funeral was held for the monarch who led Saudi Arabia for 23 years. Muslim kings, presidents, prime ministers and other world dignitaries gathered in Saudi Arabia to pay their last respect to King Fahd. Samir Jamil has the lead details.
The world had said its farewell to one of its leaders, the Saudi monarch, the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, King Fahd bin Abdulaziz. His Majesty King Abdullah II and Queen Rania Al Abdullah headed the Jordanian delegation to pay their last respect to the Saudi monarch. Kings, presidents and prime ministers from around the world gathered in Riyadh to pay their respects to the late king at a modest funeral in keeping with the kingdom's austere Islamic tradition. The king's body was carried outside the mosque in a simple brown casket into an ambulance vehicle to his final rest place. King Fahd was buried in a simple unmarked grave after a brief funeral. King Fahd died yesterday after 23 years ruling the strategic Gulf state, which is both the world's biggest oil exporter and the cradle of Islam, drawing more than 1 billion faithful to turn 5 times a day toward Mecca in prayer. In the Imam Turki bin Abdullah Mosque in the capital, Muslim leaders from across the world joined ordinary Saudis to offer condolences to Fahd's successor and brother, King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, and performed Muslim prayers for the dead. Security was at its highest alert. A Saudi official said security forces were taking the same precautions that any other government would take to secure a huge event like this with very high-profile guests. King Fahd's reign was marked by several regional wars and wild fluctuations in oil prices. King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, who was crown prince till the death of King Fahd, has run day-to-day affairs since the monarch had a stroke 10 years ago. Saudi flags emblazoned with a proclamation of faith, "There is no God but Allah," flew at full mast. Shops and businesses opened as usual in the capital, though the mood among ordinary Saudis was subdued. Ordinary Saudis gathered at the funeral with the world leaders. U.S. President George W. Bush will send Vice President Dick Cheney and other officials to offer condolences. King Fahd, aged about 83, had been in hospital since May 27, when he was admitted with acute pneumonia. He ascended the throne in 1982 at the height of the Saudi petrodollar boom, with a reputation as an administrator and international diplomat. Saudis will pledge allegiance to Abdullah and new Crown Prince Sultan tomorrow. Analysts say King Abdullah's toughest challenges will be to implement political reforms and keep up the fight against Al-Qaeda, which has waged a violent 2-year-old campaign in the Saudi kingdom. U.S. crude oil jumped after King Fahd's death, but Saudi officials said the kingdom would stand by its long-standing policy aimed at pumping enough oil to satisfy markets and stabilize prices. King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, the 5th son of Saudi Arabia's founder King Abdulaziz Al Saud to ascend the throne, is a cautious reformer who has overseen economic and political liberalization. Samer Jamil, Jordan Television.
Saddam Hussein's chief attorney has said his legal team is boycotting proceedings until a man they say attacked the former Iraqi president at a hearing is brought to justice and the court apologizes. Khalil Dulaimi called the assault on Saddam during an investigation session last week a disgraceful act. U.S. forces guarding Saddam had denied any such attack took place. Dulaimi, the only lawyer for Saddam present in the room at the time of the hearing, said the man who he believed was a reserve investigative judge of the special tribunal grabbed Saddam's arm and tried to attack him. The lawyer also reported Saddam's health still required constant medical checkups but did not mention any particular ailment. According to Dulaimi, Saddam is in total isolation, spending his time reading books, writing poetry and worship. Israeli police and soldiers deployed in southern Israel to prevent any last effort by Jewish settlers and their sympathizers to scupper a planned Israel withdrawal from Gaza this month. Army vehicles and troops were stationed near the Gaza Strip to prevent a second attempt by protesters to march en masse towards the Jewish settlements of Gaza. Thousands of rioters are expected to stream towards the southern Israeli border town of Sderot for the first leg of a 2-day march against the pullout plan. Several protesters arrived early in the day to the southern town to participate in the rally and to march towards Gush Katif settlement block despite a military closure. The government at first banned the Sderot rally. Officials cited a risk of Palestinian rocket fire or that protesters could slip past an army blockade on Gaza and reinforce settlers who have sworn to resist evacuation due to begin on August 17th. The rallies may be a last show of force against evacuations, although polls show that a narrow majority of Israelis support Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's vision of disengaging from Gaza and the corner of the West Bank. Southern Sudanese leaders moved swiftly to fill the vacuum left by the death of Vice President John Garang, choosing a close ally to succeed him. They also announced 5 days of mourning. In a silent single file, mourners came to view the casket of Garang, paying final tribute to the former rebel leader, credited with delivering an historic African peace deal. Garang's widow, Rebecca, said she was not going to apportion blame on Garang's death, saying she was in communication with world leaders, including Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni. Garang's body was retrieved from a remote mountainside close to the Ugandan border, where his helicopter crashed at the weekend. The corpse was brought to a new site, a small settlement in the bush of southern Sudan, where the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, SPLM, endorsed Salva Kiir as their new leader. The SPLM said it expected him to be sworn in as Sudan's first vice president in 2 weeks.
And he had appointed him as the vice president of the government of Southern Sudan. He now becomes the acting president of the government of Southern Sudan until he is sworn in. There has been no dissent or any disagreement. I reiterate, we had displayed a very strong sense of unity. We are determined that we will continue ahead, will provide the right and correct leadership to our people, and it is that spirit that has prevailed.
The United Nations and the United States called Garang's death a loss for the country and urged all factions to carry out the peace process he began. The United States said it dispatched two top diplomats to encourage a smooth transition in the southern leadership. Garang's death prompted some southerners to rampage through the streets of Khartoum, setting fire to vehicles and looting shops in some of the worst riots in the capital in years. At least 40 people were reported killed. But calm was returning returning to the Sudanese capital despite scattered riots. Iran has said there is no going back on its decision to restart nuclear fuel work. European Union leaders said the move would torpedo negotiations on Iran's atomic ambitions and spark an international crisis. French President Minister Philippe Douste-Blazy said the Iranian affair, which seems very serious, could be the start of a major international crisis. While German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder said Iran's decision to resume its nuclear activities was threatening and urged Tehran to change course. EU diplomats say a decision on whether to keep diplomatic options alive could depend on whether fuel work actually begins, meaning the extra week needed to bring in inspectors could offer a hope of salvaging talks. In Tehran, meanwhile, a small bomb exploded outside the offices of British Airways, the British Petroleum Oil Group and Daimler Chrysler, but there were no casualties. Officials said the blast was caused by a bomb hidden in a rubbish bin in the hallway of the large tower block on the floor shared by the three international companies. A witness who works in one of the offices said people panicked while windows were smashed with parts of the ceiling collapsing. Iran is locked in a tense standoff with Britain, Germany and France over its nuclear program. Also in Tehran, an Iranian judge who sentenced several reformist dissidents to jail, including a hunger-striking reporter, was shot dead in his car by a lone gunman riding a motorcycle. Tehran's chief of police said the judge had been killed by an assassin armed with a pistol. State television reported he was deputy prosecutor for Tehran and had been shot twice. The passenger seat of the saloon car was drenched in blood and the driver's window shattered by gunfire.
الأمين العام لحزب الله السيد حسن نصر الله على رأس وفد من قيادة الحزب.
The Secretary General of Hezbollah, Mr. Hassan Nasrallah, heading a delegation, visited the Islamic Republic of Iran, where he met with the newly elected Iranian President Ahmadinejad. Nasrallah stressed on the importance of continuing the armed struggle in Lebanon in order to defend the Lebanese people against the greed and threats of the Zionists. On behalf of the Lebanese people, Nasrallah congratulated Ahmadinejad for winning the presidential elections. He pointed out that the latest presidential election and the overwhelming participation of Iranians in the voting process showed a great deal of democracy and enthusiasm in Tehran. Nasrallah gave a speech on the foundation and the framework of Hezbollah and its fight against the occupiers and invaders. He contended that resisting the aggression is the main objective of the foundation of Hezbollah and added that the party is known for its tolerance and leniency towards the local problems, pointing out that Hezbollah always stresses on the importance of cooperation between the different Lebanese political factions and groups. The delegation also met with Iranian President Mohammad Khatami, who renewed Iran's support for the Lebanese people and government in their struggle against the enemy, hoping that Lebanon will go forward and bypass its current crisis for the sake and interests of the Lebanese people. The delegation also met with the leader of the Iranian Council for Improving Regime's Interests, Mr. Sheikh Hashimi Rafsanjani, who commended the Lebanese people for their resilience and resistance against the enemy. Rafsanjani further confirmed that the resistance of the Lebanese people is deterring the Israeli enemy from achieving its greedy interests in Lebanon. The Hezbollah delegation is also expected to meet with His Highness Mr. Ali Khamenei, Mr. Mehdi Kharoubi, and a number of other Iranian senior officials.
Well, the face of North American Jewry is changing. That's the view of Michael Landsberg, Executive Director of the Jewish Agency for North America. Landsberg was speaking to reporter Paula Sleer at JFK Airport in New York last week, just before 500 new immigrants flew to Israel. They were part of the Nefesh B'Nefesh project to bring 100,000 Northern American Olim to Israel.
Today is a very important day in the new history of Zionism and Aliyah from North America. Today is the continuation of the mass wave of Olim from North America, which symbolize a change point in modern Zionist history of North America. I predict that at the end of this year, we will have more than 3,000 Olim, which is the best number since 1983. You know, we used to say, we have not seen that for a generation. Well, I can say, we didn't see this kind of numbers more than 20 years, which is a generation. And if that is not a tipping point, a turning point in our modern Zionist history, what is? I think it's a combination of all sorts of things. First of all is what we used to call the matzav, but I think that the matzav is working for us. There's a combination. For many people, those that are affiliated with Zionism and obviously with our Jewish people, the fact that Israel was in need in the last 4 years was a real push for them to decide to materialize their dream and to move on Aliyah. On the other hand, you know, when the Twin Towers are collapsing, where an airplane is crashing over the Pentagon and not over the Knesset, God forbid, and when a sniper shoots you in Bethesda, everything becomes under proportions different. And you say to yourself, you know, if it might happen to me here, it'll better be done in Hebrew, God forbid. On the other hand, the whole atmosphere is of a new Zionist era.
Police will likely ban the scheduled march by anti-disengagement activists in the south of the country this coming week. The demonstrators are planning to march to the southern town of Sderot and then on to Gaza settlements in order to help resist the IDF evacuation of the area. Police are planning to erect roadblocks at major junctions in the south to prevent the protesters from arriving at Sderot. Roadblocks may also be placed in areas remote from Gaza, such as the Ashdod, Re'em, Kastina, Plugot, and Kama junctions. Police stress that Attorney General Menachem Mazuz has approved such measures in the case of threats against the disengagement process. There are reports, however, that settlers are planning a number of diversions in order to allow hundreds of supporters to slip into Gaza. Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas met today in Ramallah with former World Bank president and current Quartet representative James Wolfensohn. The two discussed the upcoming disengagement process and Palestinian security reforms. Wolfensohn also met with PA Minister Mohammed Dakhlan.
In recent months and years, the lack of trust between Israelis and Palestinians and Israelis has reached a new low level. That's a fact. And even when I hear Palestinians and Israelis saying the same thing, you very often get the situation where one side misinterprets the other. So we've got to a point where to reach an agreement is very difficult because everyone is suspicious. What I think has happened in the last 2 months, and I have witnessed this, is a gradual rebuilding of confidence and trust. No single person like me or anyone else can come in and wave a magic wand and say everything is better.
Iranian MPs on Tuesday awarded departing President Mohammad Khatami, who has been himself a top award-giving figure in Iran. The ceremony took place at the parliament after President Khatami presented a broad report to parliament members on the role his cabinet played in pressing ahead with the third national development plan. Following the ceremony, the outgoing president told the chamber that the third plan underlined key issues including production boost, investment, employment, social security, and education as major prerequisites for economic, social, cultural, and scientific activities in Iran. Reuters news agency has reported that the big European three have announced Tehran's resumption of its nuclear activities at Isfahan will end Iran-EU talks. So we have more on that.
The report comes as Britain, France and Germany, in a letter also signed by the European Union Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana Monday, warned Iran of making any unilateral decision. President Mohammad Khatami in turn says the enrichment process, although voluntarily, does not include resumption of some activities at Isfahan's uranium conversion facility. He says Tehran has not to the moment decided to resume uranium enrichment, but the reopening of Isfahan UCF is imminent. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency spokeswoman Melissa Fleming announced that the agency's inspectors are preparing the surveillance equipment expected to be installed in Isfahan UCF next week. At the same time, Moscow says Tehran's resumption of nuclear works would leave no negative impact on bilateral atomic cooperation, and that Russia will complete Bushehr nuclear power plant as scheduled.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's business news. Oil prices climbed to a record above $62 a barrel yesterday as the death of Saudi Arabia's King Fahd, the spate of U.S. refinery outages and tensions over Iran's nuclear ambitions rattled the market. United States light sweet crude rose to $62.30 a barrel and then eased to $62.12 on the New York Mercantile Exchange. The price has climbed 40% this year and is approaching the record high of $62.1 hit on July 7th. Fahd's successor, Crown Prince Abdullah, will adhere to Saudi Arabia's long-standing oil policy aimed at ensuring global markets are well supplied, the kingdom's next U.S. ambassador, Prince Turki Al Faisal, said. Occidental Petroleum Corporation said it has received approval from the Libyan government to resume operations in its historical contracts areas where it was forced to abandon in the mid-1980s due to U.S. sanctions on the African country. Resumptions on its Libyan properties will add 12,000 to 15,000 barrels of oil per day. In the 19 years since Occidental left the country, its properties have been operated by the state oil company through it, although it gained no financial benefit from their operations. The U.S. government based economic sanctions on Libya in April 2004, opening the door for oil companies to return.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.
Hi, I'm Blanche Shaheen. I'm a journalist and a big fan of the show that you've been watching, Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Now, I watch Mosaic to hear perspectives and voices that I just don't find on other networks. Nowhere else are so many different viewpoints represented all in one broadcast. I really value the deeper understanding of world events and cultures that I can get through watching programs like Mosaic and the other in-depth international programs on Link TV. Remember, Link TV, it's independent. It's non-commercial television. That means it's up to viewers like you and me to keep this important programming on the air. Please, if you get the chance, call or log on today and make a tax-deductible contribution. Your support will make sure that the global dialogue continues right here on Link TV. Television without borders. Thank you.